the Policy Committee of Sac Metro Fire for the, what is it, April 23rd meeting. Thank you all for being here. Let the record show that Directors Gould, Monk, and myself are happily here. We have a public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within committee scope, including items on or not on the agenda. Madam Secretary, do we have any speakers?
There are no speakers this evening.
Thank you. With that, are there any issues or questions with the consent agenda?
No questions.
Then could I have a motion?
I'll make a motion, we adopt the consent agenda for January 22nd, 2015.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Call for the question, please.
Director Monk,
Aye.
Gould,
Aye.
and Scheidegger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Let's see, we'll go on to the presentation items. Hello, Melissa, how are you?
Good evening, directors. Good evening, Chief, Madam Clerk. I'm Melissa Maddox. I'm the HR manager here at Metro Fire. Tonight, we have some policies that we've brought to you that have been revised. The first one I'd like to present is the general policy 0327.01, leave of absence. This current general policy 0327.01, leave of absence policy, has been revised with changes tracked for review, which this policy was originally revised and approved on February 2nd of 2000. The district management and representatives of Sacramento Area Firefighters Local 522 have agreed to these proposed changes. As you can see, the original policy was very brief. So we have put it in the proper format and made the policy more comprehensive so it's easier to administer. These updates are for informational purposes only, as previously directed by the policy committee. However, I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns you may have at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Members of the committee, any questions or concerns?
One can assume that everything's highlighted in yellow is new.
Yes.
And it says the effective date.
We will change that
Okay.
once it
Thank you.
gets approved.
Just thinking, we don't want to go retro 15 years.
No. It will be effective
So-
most likely tomorrow.
Okay. And is the cycle for review 2 years?
It is.
So whatever date you put in the effective date tomorrow will then have a review date?
Yes, in 2 years. And maybe sooner than that if there are necessary changes that we see just from day-to-day operations or law changes.
I'll just comment that in reviewing it, I want to commend you on the detail and everything that's in it. It's pretty concise on when the leave applies and the latitudes, everything. And I especially like the references at the end of it. And a lot of the policies we've had in the past never had the references, so where to come from, but this is really clear. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I think I can speak for the committee when I say thank you for giving us this opportunity to review this. There is no action required. So, hearing no other comments, we'll just move on to the next agenda item, if you don't mind, please.
Okay. The next policy I have for you is an administrative policy 02.002.02, light duty. These revisions have also been revised. The track changes have been highlighted for you. This was originally approved on January 27th of 2003 and was last revised on June 28th of 2012. The district management and representatives of Sacramento Area Local 522 have agreed on these changes. These updates, again, are for informational purposes only and as previously directed by the policy committee, but I am happy to address any questions or concerns you have at this time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a
Members?
question.
Yes.
So, ma'am, the question I have is on, our page 11, page 104 of this new policy, and it's an addition. And I guess it comes down to when we see words under the policy on item number 1, it says to provide reasonable accommodations. I always get leery of things that say stuff like that because that's an interpretation from two different parties that could collide significantly versus saying the determination of reasonableness lies solely within the administrative right or something along those lines. Because in my mind, you might do something that you deem as reasonable, but down the road, a plaintiff's attorney might argue that it wasn't enough. And so I'm wondering why we don't have, in this particular policy, something that says the determination of reasonableness lies solely within a single party, because I could see you just going down the road ad nauseum trying to determine whether something's reasonable, and every time the administration says, well, here's what we can reasonably do, the other party argues that it's not reasonable enough, and you spend another 6 months or a year in arbitration or some kind of adjudication body that says, well, we'll decide what's reasonable. And I'm just wondering why that seems to be the case. Is it just simply because that's the language that allows the greatest flexibility for both parties? But why do we want to put ourselves at risk when we're talking about light duty? It really puts the burden of the administration to determine if that fits, but then someone could argue that you're not making all the efforts that would be required and are potentially out there for reasonableness. So I've chatted long enough.
I think, well, Melissa will be able to, it's actually, that's a verbiage right out of, I believe, the legal code, and Melissa can elaborate on that.
A reasonable accommodation is actually a legal term.
Sure.
It is kind of vague, I agree with you, and that is one of the main struggles that we struggle with of trying to determine what a reasonable accommodation is, because it is different from the different viewpoints. It's part of the interactive process, is something that we would go through to determine what the reasonable accommodation is, and that would be with legal counsel, with the HR division, with the person who we're trying to determine the reasonable accommodation, with their doctor's reports or whatever their particular issue may be. We go through a series of interactive processes of not just one meeting, multiple meetings
Sure.
to determine and even maybe try something if that's not working. We have ergonomic evaluations, lots of different stuff. So the interactive process is really where we determine what the reasonable accommodation is. And again, it is a struggle to figure out exactly what that is, but it's just part of the process. And
But at some point, somebody has to be responsible for deciding, okay, this is it. This is the most reasonable accommodation that we can provide, and there needs to be an endpoint. Is that your experience?
yes, we've had very many experiences where we've had to come to a determination of, okay, this is what, in a light duty situation, it usually, the doctors provide us very, very clear restrictions.
Sure.
Work restrictions. So kind of determining where to place them for a light duty position is usually fairly easy. Just to, how long they can walk, stand, sit. We have lots of different divisions and different tasks that people can do on light duty.
Sure.
So just coming up with that, and even day staff, a reasonable accommodation may be getting a new chair. It may be lifting their keyboard. It may be even instances where we've had to shorten their work days, their working hours. So we just work through it through the interactive process.
I guess you can sense my frustration when we get into situations like this, and then our policy is developed, and then we get down the road and somebody, 6 years from now decides we weren't reasonable because it doesn't allow us to be definitive. And so that's just the frustration, because I've seen it happen here a couple of times, and then we end up looking like the bad guy, and that's the kind of thing I'm trying to avoid is, you're always gonna have a conflict of potential interests when two people are, trying to determine reasonableness. So,
Right.
thank you for that explanation.
Director Monk, do you have any comments?
We've seen that exact argument in recent matters that have come before this board where the decision was made, and there's always going to be somebody out there that steps forward and say, well, you guys weren't reasonable in what you did. So that shouldn't be something that stops us in doing the best we can and setting the best policy forward, because as many attorneys as there are in California, is many different opinions as you may have in California on what reasonable is, so. Going with the law and the published opinions and definitions and everything is the best route that we can go.
I had a question that's actually a derivative of that on page 12. You alluded to this, you talk about the interactive process, getting to the interactive process. And I guess who's on the interactive process? I mean, I guess it's going to vary depending on who's involved. But
Right.
typically, is there like a designation, like a second-level supervisor, or who's involved typically in the interactive process?
In a light duty situation, that's typically a workers' comp issue, and I handle the workers' comp. And when we come down to a light duty position or any kind of interactive process, I would do that in conjunction with Chief Holbrook
Okay.
and
so-
legal counsel.
So we'd have legal counsel, HR, and Chief Holbrook involved
Yes.
from our side.
Yes.
Now, who would the other side have typically? Would they have like medical personnel involved? I mean, is there?
Yes, I mean, we have our third-party administrator, York Risk Services, and then, of course, the employee.
Okay.
We talk directly with the employee. If the employee is represented by an attorney, then they would interact with our attorney, our workers' comp attorneys. But usually for this type of situation, a light duty, trying to find the location in the district where we're going to place them to do light duty is usually a pretty simple process.
Okay.
And it's the employees are very thankful to be able to come to work and at least, contribute something while they're injured, so.
Let me jump in for a minute. It's always been the district's position that, let me step out and say that we spend a lot of money on our employees to develop, and no matter what their rank, where their position is, we spend a lot of money in developing one firefighter, engineer, captain, et cetera. And we would never want to be in a position to say, I want this person gone because he can't do his job. This district is bent over backwards in a number of situations to try and fit an injured employee or an employee that needs assistance into something, because we know that the people that are in these positions are there because they want to be, not because they need a job. These are people that want to serve the public, want to serve in whatever fashion. And the best example I can give of that was Mark, bear with me, our captain at the Sierra College group.
No, I would agree with that.
Here's a man that was injured and wanted to be here. He bent over backwards and did somersaults trying to be here. But these are people that sincerely have an effort that we go out of our way to try and find something without putting them at risk, without putting our other people at risk. So I applaud anything that we can do in light duty or anything else to keep these highly paid, valuable people to us on duty.
I think it's to be noted that, the interactive process begins, and sometimes it's on-duty injuries obviously covered with workers' comp, or sometimes it's off-duty injuries that precludes them from further participating in their normal skill sets based on, their job description. And we've done a lot of interactive processes, provided a lot of thought and reflection and reasonable accommodations to get the employee back to work, gainfully employed in the process, back into their normal position. But sometimes you can't facilitate a reasonable accommodation, and then you have to go, and I think these policies demonstrate that as well. And unfortunately, as an employer, we have to have the broad base of when the accommodation cannot be made. If you don't have an open position, open qualified position, you don't have, if somebody's a safety person, they can no longer return to that line of work.
The best we can.
Yeah, we're always going to do the above and beyond for our employees.
Good, good. Speaks well of the character of this organization.
I would agree.
All right. Committee members, any other comments or questions?
No, good job.
Ms. Maddox, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For giving us this information. There is no action required, so we appreciate the opportunity for you to sunshine it before us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. That takes care of our agenda items. Our next meeting will be determined as necessary. There is nothing set at this point. So with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Your check will reflect this extra participation.
Oh, did you? Appreciate it.